The halls of the Red Keep echoed with nervous footsteps. Servants hurried past, heads down, always afraid of who might be watching. In the middle of it all, Sandor Clegane the Hound stood tall, silent, and dangerous. His burned face kept most people away, and that's exactly how he liked it. But things had changed lately. Ever since King Robert's death, the boy King Joffrey had taken the Iron Throne, and chaos followed. Lords whispered, peasants trembled, and even the Lannisters seemed unsure of what they'd unleashed. Everyone saw Joffrey as a cruel, arrogant boy, but Sandor saw something more. He saw fear. Not many noticed it. But the Hound, always watching, always in the background, had seen the boy's hands tremble when he thought no one was looking. He saw how Joffrey flinched at loud noises or angry voices, how he clung to his crown like a shield. The boy was not a monster, not yet, but he was becoming one. And Sandor knew exactly why. Cersei. She pushed him to rule like a lion, not a boy. She encouraged the cruelty, the punishments, the games with people's lives. She wanted her son to be feared, not loved. And deep down, Joffrey listened, because he wanted her approval. But Sandor had begun to think, maybe the boy needed someone else. Someone who didn't want anything from him. Someone who could see through the gold and silk and blood. That someone was him. One afternoon, after Joffrey had ordered a bard's tongue ripped out for singing a joke about the Queen, Sandor stayed behind after the throne room cleared. "You enjoy that?" he asked the young king in a low voice. Joffrey frowned, unsure if he was being mocked. "He disrespected my mother. I'm the king. He should suffer." Sandor stepped closer, slow and calm. "A real king doesn't need to prove it every day. If you cut out every tongue that speaks against you, soon you'll be alone in silence." Joffrey's lips curled, but he didn't argue. That was the first time Sandor knew his words had landed somewhere in the boy's mind. Days turned into weeks. Sandor stayed closer to the boy, not just as his sworn shield, but something more. He gave Joffrey advice, not always soft, not always kind, but honest. When the court was full of flatterers and snakes, the Hound was the only one who told the truth. "You want them to respect you, not fear you until they slit your throat in your sleep," Sandor once said. "Why do you care what they think of me?" Joffrey asked. "I don't," Sandor replied. "But I care what happens to you, because if you fall, this city burns, and I'm tired of fire." That was the first time Joffrey looked at Sandor, not like a servant, but like a man. When Sansa Stark was forced to kneel and suffer humiliation in front of the court, Sandor didn't smile like the others. He stepped beside her. "She's just a girl," he growled to the king. "A wolf in a cage is still a wolf. Don't make enemies out of children." Joffrey scoffed, but he didn't hit her. That night, Sandor saw a flicker of guilt in the boy's eyes. Small victories. It didn't mean Joffrey changed overnight. He was still cruel at times, still proud, still spoiled. But slowly, something shifted. He began to look at Sandor as more than a dog to bark at his enemies. He started to ask questions about battle, about ruling, about fear. And when Tyrion slapped him in front of the court and everyone laughed, it was Sandor who stood behind the boy king, silent and still, while even the queen looked away. Later, when Joffrey asked why he hadn't laughed too, Sandor just shrugged. "Because it wasn't funny, and you're not a boy anymore. If you want respect, start acting like a man." That night, Joffrey sat alone in his chambers, staring out at the city he ruled. He wasn't sure what kind of king he wanted to be. But one thing was certain. The only person who had never lied to him, never used him, never bowed for gain, was the man with half a face and a mouth full of truth. The Hound. And in a world full of traitors, flatterers, and whispers behind silk curtains, Joffrey had found his only true protector. The change didn't go unnoticed. The court began whispering. Why was Joffrey, the boy king with a taste for cruelty, now hesitating before issuing punishments? Why did he call for Sandor Clegane during small council meetings, sometimes more than his hand? Why was he listening to the Hound more than his mother? Cersei Lannister didn't like it. She watched the growing bond with narrowed eyes and clenched teeth. In her world, control was everything, and she was slowly losing it. Her son, once so easy to manipulate, now pushed back with a mind that didn't seem entirely his. When she questioned him, he simply muttered, "Sandor says," and she'd cut him off with fury burning in her chest. One evening, Cersei confronted Sandor herself. She met him alone in the garden courtyard, under the cold stare of the moon. The wine on her breath, as usual, came before her words. "You're getting too close to him," she said sharply. Sandor didn't even look at her. "I go where my king commands." "He's a boy. He doesn't command. He copies. And you," her voice twisted, "you are turning him into something he shouldn't be." Sandor turned then, his burned face calm. "You mean something you don't control." She stepped closer, voice lowered like a viper's hiss. "He's my son, not yours. Don't forget your place." "I know my place," he said flatly. "I've stood in fire and blood to protect kings. And this one's walking toward the edge. You keep pushing him. You think you can save him?" she snapped. "No," Sandor said, "but I might stop you from breaking him further." That night, Cersei didn't sleep. She began plotting. Meanwhile, in the throne room, changes were slowly taking form. Joffrey had started spending time outside the Red Keep, not in disguise like his father once had, but openly surrounded by guards, yes, but also with Sandor at his side. They walked the lower streets, silent mostly, but observing. Joffrey saw the hunger, the beggars, the filth of the very people who called him king. "Why are they like this?" he asked Sandor one day. "Because you sit on a golden chair while they chew bones," Sandor replied. "A crown doesn't feed bellies." Joffrey didn't respond right away. But that evening, he summoned the Master of Coin and ordered food supplies redirected to Flea Bottom. Tyrion raised an eyebrow but didn't question it yet. But power doesn't shift without consequence. During a small council meeting, Lord Baelish mocked the king's new wisdom. "A little too much peasant love for a lion, your grace," he smiled. Joffrey didn't respond. He turned to Sandor and asked, "What would you do if someone mocked your judgment in front of others?" Sandor, never one to sugarcoat, replied, "Depends who it is. If it's a snake, you cut off the tongue before it bites." The council fell silent. Littlefinger didn't smile after that. Later, in the barracks, Sir Meryn Trant tried to assert his authority. He'd grown jealous of the Hound's influence and didn't like taking orders second-hand. One evening, while training new guards, he insulted Sandor directly, saying, "A burned mutt shouldn't be giving lessons to knights." It was a mistake. Sandor slammed him into the wall before the sentence even ended. Blood spilled on the stone floor, and Trant groaned as his arm cracked under the Hound's grip. "Say it again," Sandor growled, his eyes wild. Joffrey, who had arrived mid-scene, said nothing. He watched, and when the other knights looked to him for a command, he nodded. Let him finish. And Sandor did. He didn't kill Trant, but he made sure the man never insulted him again. Broken nose, dislocated shoulder, a lesson in silence. That night, Joffrey called for wine, but not the sweet kind his mother poured. He sat with Sandor on the balcony of the tower, staring at the dark city below. "I think I hate them," he muttered suddenly. "The court?" Sandor asked. "My family. All of them. They use me like a puppet, even when they say they love me." Sandor took a deep breath. "They don't love you. They love the power through you. That's not the same thing." "What about you?" Joffrey asked. The Hound didn't answer right away. Then he muttered, "I don't love kings, but I hate what this city does to boys more." Joffrey's voice was quiet after that. "You ever think about killing them all?" Sandor's face didn't change. "Every damn day." They both laughed cold, real laughter. Not courtly, not hollow. Something had shifted. Something dangerous. In the Red Keep, a fire was building, not one of wildfire or war, but of a different kind. A king who no longer feared his family, and a hound who no longer feared his chains. It was a slow morning in King's Landing, the kind where the heat pressed against the skin like a wet cloth, and the smell of rot hung in the air no matter where you walked. But inside the Red Keep, a storm was building. Queen Cersei had summoned the small council early. No breakfast, no wine, just cold glares and whispers behind thick doors. Joffrey hadn't been invited, but he came anyway, with Sandor walking 2 steps behind him, heavy boots echoing off marble. The room fell into silence as the boy king entered unannounced. "Did I miss something?" Joffrey asked coolly, looking around the table. "Strange. I thought I was the king." Cersei stood, her lips tight. "You are, darling, but this was a quick meeting, just updates." Joffrey smiled the way a lion cub might before it learns to kill. "Then let me be updated." Varys shifted uncomfortably. Tyrion rubbed his temples. Littlefinger just leaned back, eyes narrowed. Cersei forced a smile. "We were discussing the rebellion in the Riverlands. The Starks have stirred the pot again." Joffrey glanced at Sandor, then back. "And what do you suggest we do?" "Send a message," Cersei replied instantly, harsh and loud. But before Joffrey could respond, Tyrion spoke. "Your Grace, sometimes harsh messages become fires we can't control. We need allies more than burnt bridges." Joffrey leaned forward. "So you would counsel restraint?" "Yes." Cersei cut in. "And that's why he should never have been Hound." "Enough," Joffrey snapped. Everyone froze. He rarely raised his voice, but there it was, sharp, clean, and final. "I've heard all your advice. Now hear mine. This kingdom is falling apart because every decision made in this room is driven by fear or greed. I'm not here to play your games anymore." He stood slowly, eyes hard. "From now on, Sandor sits in on every council. Speak freely, but speak wisely." The meeting ended in silence, but the damage was done. Joffrey had just declared independence from his mother and her allies and put the Hound on the throne without a crown. That night, as the torches flickered and the city outside hummed with unrest, Cersei came to her son's chamber. She didn't knock. "Do you hate me now?" she asked, stepping into the candlelight. Joffrey didn't look up. He was reading a raven scroll. He let the silence stretch, heavy and cold. "I don't hate you," he said finally. "I just don't believe you anymore." Cersei's voice cracked. "Everything I've done was for you." "No," Joffrey replied. "Everything you've done was for you. I was just your weapon." A tear slipped down her cheek, but he didn't flinch. "I've been a fool, Mother. I thought power was screaming at people until they bent. But I see now that only makes them bend long enough to stab you in the back." She walked closer, reaching for him, but Sandor stepped from the shadows behind the door. Silent, watching. Cersei hesitated. "I loved you," she whispered. "No," Joffrey said again. "You loved control." She left without another word. Over the next few days, things in the castle shifted fast. Joffrey ordered an audit of the royal treasury. He halted the construction of the massive royal sept, calling it vanity in stone. He summoned northern lords to the capital, not with threats, but offers of trade and neutrality. Rumors exploded. The boy king had gone mad, some said. Others claimed the Hound had poisoned his mind. But in the streets of King's Landing, something strange happened. The people stopped throwing shit at the guards. Bread began reaching the alleys. Gold was seen in the hands of city builders. Some even said the king had walked among them, not in disguise, but in truth. And with that truth came whispers of fear in the hearts of the powerful. One evening, in a dusty corridor deep beneath the Red Keep, Varys approached Sandor. "You've changed him," the spider said softly. "I didn't change him," Sandor replied. "I just showed him who was pulling his strings." Varys nodded. "That makes you dangerous." "I've always been dangerous," the Hound growled. But Varys didn't smile. He leaned in close. "Kings who turn against their own blood don't live long. Protecting him now means protecting him from everyone, including the crown that made him." Sandor didn't blink. "I'll protect him," he said, voice like stone. "From Lannisters, lions or liars, anyone who tries to break him will answer to me." Varys stepped back into the shadows. The game was changing, and for the first time, the boy on the throne wasn't just a puppet. He had a sword, and it didn't wear gold armor. It had burned flesh, a bitter heart, and it answered to no one but him. The day the first assassin came, it wasn't with a sword or a dagger. It came with honeyed words and a smile as smooth as silk. Lord Baelish returned from Harrenhal, claiming loyalty and brotherhood. He brought expensive wines, northern fur cloaks, and a gift, a rare black stallion bred in the Vale. Joffrey accepted the gifts with the cool grace Sandor had taught him, but said little. Later, behind closed doors, the Hound stood by the window, arms crossed, his rough voice filling the chamber. "Petyr Baelish doesn't give gifts. He gives poison wrapped in silk." Joffrey nodded, swirling wine in his cup without drinking. "I know." He smiles with his mouth, not his eyes. Sandor gave a small grunt of approval. "You're learning." But the real danger didn't ride in through the gates, it brewed in the Red Keep itself. Cersei had grown quiet, which Sandor knew was worse than her fury. She no longer argued with Joffrey in public, she didn't insult the Hound, she simply watched, waited, and schemed. The Queen had begun meeting in secret with Grand Maester Pycelle, Ser Meryn Trant, still bruised, and a handful of Lannister loyalists who had sworn silent oaths under candlelight. If she couldn't control the boy anymore, she would remove what was controlling him. And that meant Sandor Clegane had to die. The plan was simple. A hunt. A morning ride into the woods outside King's Landing Royal, organized and heavily guarded. But Cersei had arranged for a surprise. A group of bandits would attack. In the chaos, Sandor would fall, tragically, a beast killed like a beast. But plans, like swords, bend when tested by steel. The morning was warm, the air thick with the scent of pine and sweat. Joffrey rode at the front, Sandor by his side. The other knights followed in formation, some real guards, some not. And further back, Ser Meryn whispered instructions to a cloaked rider. They reached the clearing, just past the river bend, when it happened. Arrows flew from the tree line. The first struck a knight through the throat. Horses reared, swords were drawn. Chaos. Sandor reacted like an animal, silent, fast, brutal. He pushed Joffrey off his horse and dragged him behind a fallen log. Arrows hissed past them. One sliced the king's shoulder. Blood spilled, but Joffrey stayed quiet, clutching his wound with gritted teeth. "Stay low," Sandor growled. He rose, great sword in hand, and charged straight into the trees. The attackers weren't bandits. They wore no sigils but moved like trained killers. Sandor dropped two before the third drove a dagger into his side. He roared, twisted, and snapped the man's neck with his bare hands. Behind him, Ser Meryn finally joined the fray too late. When the dust settled, 6 men lay dead, one knight missing, Joffrey. still alive. Sandor, bleeding but breathing, stood over the corpses like a grim god of war. Joffrey walked up to Sir Meryn, still pale, sword untouched. "Where were you?" the king demanded. "I, your grace. I was flanking." "You were late," Joffrey said coldly. "Too late." He turned to Sandor, who was ripping fabric to bind his wound. "You saved me." Sandor didn't look up. "That's what I do." That evening, Joffrey summoned his small council and excluded his mother. Tyrion raised an eyebrow but didn't object. Varys merely blinked, slower than usual. Lord Baelish was already smiling, always one step ahead. "An attempt on the king's life was made today," Joffrey said flatly, "and I have reason to believe it was planned within these walls." He let the silence sit, heavy as steel. "From now on," he continued, "no royal hunts will occur without the Lord Commander's direct oversight. All guard assignments go through Sandor, no exceptions." Tyrion clapped slowly. "A wise move, perhaps overdue." Baelish only bowed. "Long live the king." But later that night, in his chamber, Joffrey didn't sleep. He stood by the window while Sandor, bandaged but standing, poured a mug of water. "They tried to kill me," the king said quietly. "My own blood." Sandor didn't speak. "I thought I could change the way they saw me, that if I ruled better, they'd love me." Sandor looked at him finally. "That was your first mistake. Lions don't love, boy. They feed." Joffrey nodded slowly. His face was pale, tired, but hardening. "No more kindness," he whispered. "No more soft words. If they want a monster." Sandor stepped closer. "Then you make sure they fear the right one." The boy king didn't smile. He simply stared into the fire. And from that night on, a new Joffrey began to rise, less a boy, more a blade, forged not by Cersei's fire, but by the brutal truth of the Hound's hand. A new rumor was spreading through King's Landing like wildfire, quiet and sharp, passed through taverns, whorehouses, and alley corners. "The Hound runs the Red Keep now." People said the king only listened to the man with the ruined face, that he'd turned on his own blood, on his mother, on the lions who raised him. That he walked among the poor now, swordless but never unguarded, that he was changing. The highborns hated it. The small folk weren't sure what to make of it, but the court feared it. For the first time in years, there were consequences for lies. Bribes were returned, tax collectors vanished. A lord who whipped his stable boy too hard was found outside the city, tied to a post, with whip marks of his own and no tongue. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone suspected the king. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei had gone silent again, not defeated, just waiting. Her face was colder now, her whine heavier. She watched her son in silence, no longer correcting him in public, no longer touching his shoulder or smoothing his hair like before. Because he no longer looked like her boy. He stood straighter now, spoke slower. He wore less gold and more black. He didn't laugh unless it was sharp and cruel, and he didn't flinch when someone defied him because no one dared to anymore. It was around this time that Tyrion came to Sandor, alone, in a stone hallway where secrets echoed best. "You know this ends with one of you dead," the imp said, voice low. Sandor leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Probably. Is that the plan? Toughen him up until he's strong enough to cut down his own family?" Sandor met his eyes. "No. Toughen him up so he knows who needs to be cut down." Tyrion sighed. "You've made him unpredictable." "I made him awake." "And what happens when he wakes up and realizes he doesn't need you anymore?" Sandor didn't answer, because he'd already thought about that. That night, Joffrey summoned Sansa. It had been weeks since he'd spoken to her directly. She came in slowly, eyes cautious, still expecting the boy who had once humiliated her in front of the court. But that boy was gone. Joffrey looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, not loudly, not cruelly, just honestly. "I wronged you." Sansa froze, uncertain whether it was a trick. "I let them make you a prisoner," he continued. "Used you to humiliate the Starks. You were a piece on a board I didn't even know I was standing on." She swallowed hard. "And now? And I'm not asking forgiveness," he said, "but I am offering truth. If you stay here, you are not my prisoner anymore. You're my guest. My father's blood doesn't mean I'll repeat his mistakes." Sansa stared. Then, softly, "Which father?" That made him smirk. "Both, I suppose." Sandor watched from the shadows. He didn't trust the girl, not fully, but he respected her. She had survived hell with poise and silence. That made her dangerous, in a different way. And dangerous people were useful. 3 days later, Lord Baelish made his move. It was elegant, a planned marriage between Joffrey and the daughter of a wealthy Reach house, a show of power, of loyalty, of legacy. "A true king must breed legacy," he said, smiling. But Joffrey, calm and silent, turned to Sandor in front of the entire court. "Is it legacy they care about, or leash?" Sandor didn't smile. "Both." So Joffrey looked at Littlefinger and said, "I will choose who I marry. And when. Not when the court thinks it can control me through silk and smiles." Baelish's face twitched just slightly. The game had slipped, and suddenly all the whispers of mad king and boy tyrant began to change. Because the new Joffrey wasn't mad. He was aware, calculating, and still protected by the one man in the castle who didn't want his crown, just his soul unbroken. But peace never lasts in a city built on betrayal. That night, Sandor received a warning, slipped under his chamber door on old parchment. No name, just a sentence. "The Queen has reached out to the Tyrells. She means to poison your bond, and then your blood." Sandor read it twice, then burned it in the flame. The war hadn't started with blades, but it was coming. And when it did, it would be mother versus son, lioness versus hound, and a king who had finally chosen whose voice to trust. The invitation came sealed in gold wax, the sigil of House Tyrell pressed proudly into it. A private feast, a gathering of joy and alliance, the letter claimed. Marjorie Tyrell had returned to King's Landing, her beauty once again lighting up the court like a torch in a dark tunnel. Cersei smiled when Joffrey read the invitation aloud, her face calm, her wine untouched for once. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it's time you considered a queen." Joffrey didn't answer right away. He glanced toward Sandor, standing silently in the corner, and the Hound's face didn't change, but his eye narrowed, just slightly. That night, Joffrey asked plainly, "Do you think she's part of it?" Sandor shrugged. "She's too pretty not to be dangerous. She's clever. That's worse. Then, should I reject her?" "No," Sandor said, stepping forward. "You walk into the lion's den, but you don't go alone, and you don't drink anything you didn't see poured." Joffrey smirked. "You'll taste my wine first. I'll drink the whole damn bottle if it keeps you breathing." And so, the feast happened. Golden candles lit the long table. Marjorie sat beside Joffrey, her dress the color of deep forest, her voice soft and bright, her words soaked in honey. The lords toasted, the ladies whispered. Cersei watched from across the room, her eyes never leaving Sandor, who stood behind Joffrey like a wolf on a leash. Marjorie leaned in close. "You've grown stronger," she said, her hand brushing the king's. Joffrey looked at her. "Or maybe I was just always too quiet for them to notice." She smiled. "You don't have to be alone, you know." "I'm not," he replied. She glanced over her shoulder at the Hound, and for a moment her mask cracked, just a flicker of something sharp in her eyes. The meal continued, laughter echoed, music played. And then Sandor saw it, a cup switch, subtle, performed by one of the Tyrrell servants, a boy with quick fingers and a false smile. The wine Joffrey had been sipping was gone, replaced by a fresh one, refilled with care. Too much care. Sandor didn't wait. He stepped forward, grabbed the cup mid-air before it reached Joffrey's lips, and poured it onto the floor. A sharp silence fell over the room. "Is there a problem?" Margaery asked, her voice calm, but her eyes flashing. Sandor glared at the servant. "Bring me another cup, from the same bottle." The boy hesitated. "Now." The wine was brought again. Sandor sipped it this time, eyes locked on Margaery. Then he threw the goblet to the floor. "Tastes like crushed dreams and sweet poison," he said coldly. "I'd know. I grew up drinking worse." Gasps spread through the hall. Cersei stood slowly, fury disguised as shock. "This is an accusation," she said sharply. "No," Sandor growled. "This is a warning." Joffrey stood up beside him, calm but stone-faced. "You brought a snake into my hall, Mother." "She's a guest." "She's your weapon," he cut in. "And you tried to use her to break me." Margaery's smile faded completely now. "You think I would poison a king?" "I think you're clever enough to try," Sandor replied, "and dumb enough to get caught." Joffrey walked from the table then, the hall splitting open for him like water before a ship. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't call for guards, he just walked. And Sandor followed, leaving behind a room full of shocked nobles and a queen with clenched fists. Later that night, the servant who had poured the wine was found hanging from the walls dead, eyes wide, no note, but not by royal order. By silence. No one claimed it. No one had to. That same night, Joffrey sat alone in his chambers, staring into the fire again. "They'll never stop, will they?" he asked. "No," Sandor said, "because you were never meant to rule, just to wear the crown while they played with the strings. I should kill them all." Sandor didn't blink. "Not yet. First you break them without drawing your sword." "How?" "Take what they fear losing, their gold, their names, their secrets." Joffrey nodded slowly. "Then when I do draw the sword, they'll already be bleeding." Outside, the city burned in oil lamps and drunk laughter. Inside, a boy, once seen as mad, was quietly building his revenge, taught not by lords or queens, but by a man who had bled in the mud, burned in fire, and learned the truth early. In a kingdom of liars, only the Hound tells the truth. And now, that truth was in the king's ear. The silence in the Red Keep had become unnatural. Whispers were no longer playful gossip, they were warnings. Every glance had weight, every smile hid a blade. Nobles no longer laughed during feasts, servants stepped lighter, and the Queen's chambers echoed more than ever before. Cersei Lannister, once the true ruler of the court through charm, fear, and bloodline, found herself isolated. Her son no longer dined with her. He no longer asked her advice. Worse, he watched her like an enemy. The only voice he listened to now was Sandor Clegane. And Sandor spoke very little. That made him more terrifying. In the privacy of their shared planning chamber, a place once reserved for generals and kings, Sandor handed Joffrey a scroll. "What's this?" the king asked. "The names of every noble family in the capital with ties to the Tyrells or the Queen's circle," Sandor said. "The ones buying loyalty behind your back. Some fund rebel banners in the Reach. Some just want you gone." Joffrey read through the list slowly. "So what do we do? Send the heads to the wall? Put them in chains?" "No," Sandor said. "You want to be feared, not pitied. Let them rot in respectable ruin." The plan was elegant. It started with taxes. Joffrey issued a new royal decree, retroactive levies on houses who had benefited unjustly during Robert's reign, lands seized, ships impounded, titles revoked on technicalities, all legal, all bloodless. In the public eye, he was balancing the crown's debts. In truth, he was cutting the Queen's arms off, one noble at a time. And then came the next blow, subtle, quiet, and vicious. A letter sent to Lady Olenna Tyrell, not from the king, but from Sansa Stark. They used me, like they use everyone. The king has changed. He sees them for what they are. We are not enemies. Not yet. Sansa had hesitated before signing it. She wasn't sure what Joffrey's game was, but the Hound had looked her in the eyes and said only one thing. You want your freedom, girl? Earn it. The letter sparked chaos in Highgarden. The Tyrells began doubting their own plan. Marjorie was recalled. Quietly. No announcement, no marriage, just gone. And in her place, Varys noticed something odd. Queen Cersei was losing her guests. Her gatherings became emptier, her guards thinner. The web was unraveling. One night, Varys approached Joffrey in the gardens, the moonlight painting silver across the boy's face. You've made enemies of nearly everyone now, Varys said gently. I was born with enemies, Joffrey replied. I just stopped pretending they were family. Varys nodded. You've grown clever, but clever kings don't last unless they know when to stop. Why are you warning me? Joffrey asked. Varys looked towards Sandor, standing in the shadows, arms folded like a statue carved from rage. Because I fear the day you stop listening to him. That night, Joffrey dreamed of fire, of sitting the throne alone with his family burning below it. When he woke, his jaw was clenched, and the Hound was already standing by the door. They'll move soon, Sandor said. Mother? All of them. Joffrey stood. Then let them. The move came at dawn. An ambush, not in the streets, but in the court. Cersei had gathered the last loyal lords, Pycelle and Ser Meryn. A signed declaration of mental instability was prepared. Varys had forged it. Tyrion had been neutralized, locked in his chamber with guards under Cersei's control. The plan was to remove Joffrey from the throne, quietly, publicly, with concern for his health. But when the Queen entered the throne room to announce it, she found it already full. The banners of House Lannister were gone, replaced by the royal black and gold, high above the Iron Throne. Sandor stood at the base of the steps, sword drawn. Joffrey sat upon the throne, one leg draped lazily over the other, a scroll in his hand. "What is this?" Cersei demanded, fury breaking through her mask. Joffrey smiled. "It's called a trap. I learned it from the best." He held up the scroll. Signed confessions, multiple witnesses, proof of treason, attempted regicide by wine, conspiracy with the Tyrells, bribery of the small folk, and most recently, sedition. You forged that. No, he interrupted, calm. You did. He waved his hand. The guards turned on her. Not gold cloaks, not Lannister men. His men, young, brutal, loyal to him. "You're not my queen anymore," Joffrey said softly. "You're just another name on a long list of people who thought they could shape me." Cersei stared at her son. Her little boy, the one she had cradled, whispered lies into, raised like a god. Now he looked down at her like a stranger. And next to him, the Hound stood silent, no crown, no title, but the real force that had torn her kingdom apart from the inside. The trial was swift. There was no jury, no debate, just scrolls read aloud in the throne room and a quiet queen standing before the Iron Throne, once her seat of power, now her place of judgment. Joffrey sat in silence as the charges were listed. Treason, conspiracy, attempted murder of the king, sedition, abuse of royal power. Cersei didn't deny them. She didn't plead. She just stared at her son, as if still trying to recognize the child she once held against her breast. But he was long gone. In his place sat something sharper, colder, someone she didn't build, but had created nonetheless. When the charges were done, Joffrey leaned forward. "Do you have anything to say?" Cersei's voice was soft, almost maternal. "You think you're strong now, but you're still a scared little boy, hiding behind a burned dog." The court stirred. Sandor didn't flinch. Joffrey's voice was calm. "I was scared. Of you. Of what I was becoming. But not anymore. You've lost everything that made you a Lannister," she spat. Joffrey nodded. "Maybe that's the only thing that's kept me alive." He stood. "Your sentence is exile. Effective immediately. You'll be escorted to Casterly Rock, stripped of title, and guarded day and night. If you step foot in King's Landing again, you'll be executed." Cersei didn't scream. She didn't weep. She only whispered, "You'll need me one day, and I won't come." Joffrey turned away. "You won't be missed." As she was led from the hall, the nobles watched in stunned silence. The lioness was caged, and no one had raised a sword. But power has its own weight, and now that he held it alone, Joffrey felt it pressing down. Later in his chamber, the firelight flickered low. He sat at the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, crown beside him. "You did it," Sandor said from across the room. "I know," Joffrey said, but he didn't sound victorious. He sounded tired. "They'll call me a tyrant. They already did. And now, they'll call you something worse." "What's that?" Sandor shrugged. "A king." Silence stretched between them. Then Joffrey asked, "Do you think she ever loved me? Even a little?" Sandor looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat across from him, shoulders heavy, his voice lower than ever. "Maybe. In her own twisted way. But it wasn't love that raised you. It was fear. And fear doesn't raise sons, it forges weapons." Joffrey nodded slowly. "Do you fear me?" "No," Sandor said simply. Joffrey smiled faintly. "Good." The days that followed were quiet. The court adjusted, lords bowed deeper. The small council changed. Tyrion was released and named Hound once again, though even he seemed uneasy around his nephew now. Sansa was given a private estate outside the city and offered freedom, but she stayed. Not because she trusted Joffrey, but because she trusted Sandor to keep him human. And that, in the end, was the only reason the kingdom didn't fall into madness. Joffrey ruled with a colder hand. Yes, but not a cruel one. Punishments were swift but fair. Grain flowed. Thieves were branded, not flayed. The streets were cleaner. The gold cloaks paid. The taxes evened. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it meant something. Then, one evening, as the sun set behind the Blackwater, Joffrey and Sandor stood atop the walls. "I was supposed to be a monster," Joffrey said, "a golden boy gone mad." Sandor stared at the horizon. "You still could be. And yet, here I stand. For now." Joffrey glanced at him. "Do you think I'll make it?" Sandor didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "You'll die, like all kings do, but you'll die on your own terms, not theirs, and that's more than most ever get." They stood in silence again, two broken men, one scarred outside, the other within. The boy king and his hound, not master and servant, not ruler and sword, but something more dangerous, something the realm had never seen before. A king forged not by love, not by prophecy, not by blood, but by truth.